Welcome to the Reason Roundtable, your top-of-the-week libertarian podcast, brought to you by the magazine of free minds and free markets. I'm Matt Welch, joined by Nick Gillespie, Peter Suderman, and Katherine Mangu-Ward. Hi, gang.
Howdy.
Hey, Matt.
Happy Monday.
We are going to endeavor to try and figure out just what the hell happened last week on Capitol Hill. But first, a reminder that this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Friends, do you ever feel awesome? Like those kids jumping off the rock in a Mountain Dew commercial, or that time in Almost Famous when they all start singing Tiny Dancer in the bus? Well, what's keeping you from being there now? How do you get to your good place? For millions of people, therapy can help remove obstacles and build new pathways toward getting to your very best self. That's where BetterHelp, the world's largest therapy service, comes in. BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists. It's an affordable service, 100% online, and super flexible. If you don't like your first match, swap them out for another until you find the right fit. Listeners who act right now can get 10% off their first month. Just go to betterhelp.com/roundtable, fill out a brief questionnaire, and find a quicker path to your better self. That's better, H-E-L-P, like pizzazz. Go there today. You'll be glad you did. All right, so about last week. Today, Monday, is the first real work day for the 118th Congress, which, as of recording time, is voting on its own rules after a series of both remarkable and banal scenes last week when it took the incoming House of Representatives and its very slim GOP minority 15 votes to bestow the speakership onto the so-called Bakersfield Comet, Kevin McCarthy. A rebel bloc of 20 Republicans centered in the House Freedom Caucus refused to support McCarthy vote after vote until getting a bunch of promises. The ability to bring amendments to the House floor, which we haven't seen for more than a half decade, key committee assignments for several of the rebels, of course, a new church commission, in the words of Thomas Massie, to investigate the deep state, and at least an oral commitment to tether forthcoming increases in the nation's debt ceiling to future spending cuts. Depending on who you talk to, the process was entertainingly chaotic, depressingly nihilistic, an advertisement for C-SPAN, and or a demonstration both for and against the continued relevance of Donald J. Trump. Donald J. Trump should not put initials in prepared text, let alone read it. Katherine, what did you learn from last week? What was your overall impression?
So I actually will give kind of like my personal take, which is that I went into the week as maybe a little too in favor of status quo. Let's just do things the way we always do them. I was kind of like, who are these? What are these shenanigans? It's going to be McCarthy. Let's just have it be McCarthy and move on. And my colleagues here at Reason convinced me both with their genuine personal delight over said shenanigans and also with their excellent writing on some of the substance of the demands of these folks, that there was more to it and that actually maybe, there at least some of the demanded concessions, I think, will be good things. I think it's, there really were echoes in there, at least, of a kind of Republican Party concerned with fiscal discipline. In the end, is it shenanigans all the way down? I think so, right? I mean, they are not, in fact, going to have more time to read the bills in the end. They are not, in fact, going to lash themselves to the mast of fiscal discipline in any meaningful way. And they are, in fact, going to have some kind of wacky people on committees who previously would not have been on committees. So I think that's probably a real downside. But not to mention there's a bunch of showy, we have to bring a vote to the floor about medical care for, failed abortion babies and all kinds of stuff like that, which I do not think will be productive nor actually change legislation in the end. But what I have long said is I want voices on the Hill who argue for fiscal discipline, even unto the point of obstructionism. I have expressed nostalgia about the old days of the Tom Coburns and such. And maybe I should be careful what I wish for, but I think I have come around on the view that there may have been more good than harm done in the last week. in the end.
A fun fact about Tom Coburn is that when Republicans were under the Trump administration were negotiating, I think it was a 10-year budget, blueprint. He had said that he was not going to approve anything if it raised the long-term deficit by even 1 penny. And now Tom Coburn is no longer in the United States Senate. Peter, speaking of promises, first, what's your overall impression of what happened? And second, perhaps most pressingly, when are we going to start finding out whether or not these promises amount to a hill of beans?
Okay, so my overall impression is that we learned that Kevin McCarthy is going to be a very weak speaker. Notably, he never even got a full majority. He won the speakership with 216 votes, not with 218, because a group of people agreed to vote present. And that is going to mean that he is not going to exert a whole lot of control over this chamber. I think we learned that Kevin McCarthy has an endless appetite for embarrassment and humiliation. It's obviously some sort of personal kink. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We learned that democratic processes are, or at least can be, quite chaotic. And we also learned, to Katherine's point, that chaos can produce some, at least potentially, substantive gains. So last week I said that just because many of the anti-McCarthy types are kind of clowns does not necessarily mean that all of their demands are pure goofy balls. And I think this week has borne that out. I would point very specifically to the process demands with regards to the budget. McCarthy has at least theoretically agreed to return to regular order. And what that means is that he has agreed to bring all of the appropriations bills, the spending bills that make up the kind of the sort of normal budget process, individually, rather than all of them rolled up as a single end-of-year omnibus mega bill. And they've also, as part of that, agreed to a process whereby if they can't manage to pass all of the bills that would normally go into an omnibus, if they can't manage to pass those appropriations bills, they're just going to do a continuing resolution, which means they continue on with the same funding levels. Now, that agreement has already been portrayed as, oh, that's tantamount to budget cuts, and it's going to be right. They're going to be cutting funding because if you keep everything at the same funding level, then that's cutting spending in Washington. But that's not a bad outcome necessarily. Now, I don't think we will get to see whether or not they actually deliver on that promise for many months, possibly not until the end of the year. Probably, towards September or so, which is when the current funding bill runs out. However, if we return to something like regular order, and if the alternative to regular order is not, a giant omnibus, but instead just keep things at the same level of funding that we already have, whereby they are already operating, that's not a terrible outcome from all of this.
Nick, what was your overall impression, and do you have the sense that we're going to see some of the return to the politics and policy of the 2010 to 2013 era of sequestration cuts and showdowns over the debt ceiling increase?
Yeah, I don't know about the latter, but unlike my esteemed colleagues, I was absolutely enjoying the spectacle of Kevin McCarthy, the Bakersfield Comet. Just, he was like Kohoutek, Matt. He was supposed to be blazing across the sky and instead you could barely see him. He's, as I've discussed before, and I really refer people to my interview with Robert Draper, author of Weapons of Mass Delusion, for a longer discussion of McCarthy's failings. But he's the worst kind of careerist. And he is kind of an apt dead end for kind of the modern Republican speaker. He's going to be a weak speaker, but ultimately it's not simply because he is a craven, unprincipled person who was anti-Trump and pro-Trump and this and that, who's gotten his comeuppance. But Matt, I think that what we witnessed over the past week was actually a fulfillment of one of the main points of our book, The Declaration of Independence, which is that The parties are, have had a long drift over at least the past 20 years into a functional stalemate where neither of them can maintain a strong majority because they don't actually stand for anything. They represent coalitions that have, that were formed maybe in the 70s or 80s, but certainly no longer exist. And as a result, cannot muscle through any kind of significant long-term majority. And we should take delight in the fact that it was so, first that the Republicans couldn't get the majority they should have and was predicted by historical reality. And second, that McCarthy himself struggled to do this. The Republican Party is going to need to reform itself and either recommit to an actual politics and at least a rhetoric of limited government if they want to persist and kind of increase their majority, or the Democrats need to do something because they also have not been able to maintain majorities for long periods of time. I think we should welcome this as libertarians and push on the things that the renegades in the Republican Party held out for, which are the kinds of formal process-based reforms that would make Congress actually more serious about legislation. And then we can work on the actual content of that legislation. The cutting spending is good, although, it's unlikely. And one of the things that I disliked about the conversation about all of this, along with the omnibus spending bill, is, again, that we're talking about discretionary spending, which is a quarter of the budget at this point.
I hasten to add, thanks to the corrective real-time fact-checking of Nick Gillespie, that I dead-named Tom Coburn.
That's not what that word means.
The person who I was referring to is Bob Corker, not Tom Coburn. Bob Corker from Tennessee, not Tom Coburn from wherever Tom Coburn was
Oklahoma.
from. So, thank you very much. I knew I was going to get it wrong, so I might as well just not say it.
Can I also just say the one thing? Thomas Massie, I feel, has been wobbly from a true limited government perspective over the past few years. I love the idea of a new church-style commission, but it will be ruined if it is done in a starkly partisan way, which almost seems certain. I mean, what was interesting ultimately about the Church Commission and the Rockefeller Commission as well in the mid-'70s is that they represented a majority and a kind of consensus of the governing class as well as the people that we really needed to look into things like the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI and secret government shenanigans.
Yeah, it's part of that. If you go back and look even at the Senate Select Committee to investigate Watergate and just read through the comments of the Republicans at the time looking into this and promising to be serious about looking into this, and contrast that to any of the kind of ongoing partisan clown show that we have right now, it's a different world. Definitely a different world. There was in that struggling mid-'70s time, there was a bipartisan attempt at some amount of seriousness. Whatever happened afterwards is a different thing altogether. But speaking of Massie, Katherine, there was a lot of discussion of Justin Amash was up on the Hill making a very fruitless attempt to throw his hat in the ring. And he was sitting next to Thomas Massie, his old friend in Congress. And Massie voted for McCarthy every single time, just without any kind of question. And then afterwards, in interviews, he said, hey, look, we went after, we being him and Amash and Freedom Caucus, we went after John Boehner, we went after Paul Ryan, we did all this kind of stuff, and we didn't get anywhere. We just lost. We didn't get anything out of it this time because of Chip Roy and because of, I don't think a lot of people credited Matt Gaetz, except with his hair, but
and his forehead. Which was
his
trending.
Incredible forehead.
It was trending on Twitter, actually, over the weekend.
But Matt Rosendale, who gave some actually really excellent speeches from Montana as part of this process, and other people in the negotiations, they actually got somewhere. So is Massie coming off smelling more like a rose to you there, Katherine?
I don't know. I mean, I guess you could make a kind of like Massie and Amash walked so that Peppa could run situation here. I don't know. Like, the part of this whole week of shenanigans that was odd to me was that there was never an alternative candidate. And I think that's, that wasn't their goal, right? Their goal was to force these concessions. But like there was no one in that cluster or even willing to be associated with that cluster respectable enough to put seriously forward as a speaker candidate. And I guess Amash would have said that he was putting himself forward. And I would love me an Amash speakership, but it was not in the cards. You know, if it's really 3/5 vote to raise taxes, if it's really 72 hours for bills, if it's really Cutco or whatever we're calling it, then yeah, they did what many of their predecessors failed to do. I'm skeptical it's going to stick.
Peter, the proximate cause for, in many circles, mainstream media circles especially, panic, and other circles, more fiscally conservative circles, some sense of long buried optimism, is the debt ceiling discussions coming forward. Right now, I think the projection is the limit on borrowing has to be raised in July. It's always kind of slippery the way that they describe this and what happens. And in that process, given the way that the debt ceiling has been more or less taken off the table since 2014 by Republicans, what do you foresee as their political ability to make the debt ceiling any kind of leverage point in negotiations within Congress and among the public at large?
The real answer there is that no one knows how that negotiation is going to go. And there is a real chance that it is quite chaotic and that there is significant market turmoil as a response to that, and that there are economic consequences. But I don't think that's at all guaranteed. So let's just start with, I am perhaps a little bit of an outlier on this podcast. At least I know Nick and I have sometimes disagreed about the debt ceiling. I understand why libertarians are like, we shouldn't raise the debt ceiling. It sounds like the sort of thing that you shouldn't raise. You don't want more debt, right? Like I totally get where libertarians are coming from. But the thing is about the debt ceiling is that spending has already been authorized. It's like buying, a fancy dinner on your credit card and then deciding that what you need to do in order to cut spending is to not pay your credit card bill. Yes, I know we're not supposed to compare the congressional budget to household budgets, but that's basically the idea here is don't pay for spending that you have already authorized. It is, and that I think is not necessarily the best leverage point. I would also point out, as you just did, Matt, that under Trump, Republicans did not make the debt lit an issue at all, which at minimum tells you that there is an awful lot of hypocrisy here, that they only care about the debt limit when there is a Democrat in the White House who they feel like they can extract concessions from and make look bad. And because Democrats feel that Republicans aren't negotiating in good faith on the debt limit, they feel like Obama really got rolled in the debt limit negotiations during the Obama presidency. I think Democrats are going to be fairly loath to give any concessions here and are not going to want to do that. And so when you have a party that is the Republican Party is very fractious and not together, and it's just going to be hard to corral. You have a weak speaker, as we've talked about, and you have Democrats not really willing to give an inch on this, as far as I can tell. I think you may end up in a situation that is somewhat unprecedented, where that we actually do sort of go beyond the debt limit. There is something like a technical default or something in that zone. It's sort of, again, we've never done this before, so it's a little bit hard to describe exactly what's going to happen. And at minimum, there's going to be a market reaction when that happens, and it may take some economic consequences, I guess, is the only way I can say this to get through this. At the same time, I am happy to see, I'm happy to see a Republican Party that has returned even to perhaps cynical and perhaps not entirely in good faith rhetorical pushes for fiscal responsibility. Obviously, it would be better if they were smart about this stuff, and if they had done, taken the chance to cut spending and do things like this under Trump. They didn't. At the same time, it's always at least welcome to have one party that is talking about this sort of thing, rather than both parties that are just like, well, let's just keep running up the tab.
Nick, do you want to tell Peter why he should stop worrying and learn to love the debt limit negotiations?
I mean, I think both he and Katherine are correct that it's it's hard to see how this plays out in a way that actually reduces spending, but I think that's what we gotta go for, because federal spending, again, most of it's on autopilot, but it has to be reined in. The problem is that the Republican Party is full of shit on this, and they really need to make a commitment to reducing spending, and actually make a credible commitment to that. And they also have to find Democrats who are at least, somehow, do some kind of voodoo and bring back blue dog Democrats or something. But otherwise, this is just one more sign that the Republican Party is kind of out to lunch and is virtue signaling. When it comes to the federal budget, and they'll be ignored. There'll be a messy semi-showdown, which won't actually be it, and the result will be a big kickoff into things. The Republicans tend to lose budget showdowns. What was effective in the Obama years was the fact that Obama got that 1 or 2 year massive increase in spending, and then things were held kind of steady until Trump came into office. Then COVID, let loose the barn doors on everything. But we need this. We need something. We need to start talking about why we are spending too much and why that needs to change, sooner rather than later.
There's also some history here that I think is just relevant real quick. Since Nick brought up Robert Draper earlier, Draper had a piece in the New York Times over the weekend drawing a direct line from the Gingrich Revolution in the 1990s to the Tea Party to the anti-McCarthy rebellion. And he argued that in basically every case, the initial drive for fiscal responsibility kind of resolved into a politics of cultural grievance and nihilism about governing. And I think that maybe, I'm not sure I agree with exactly every phrase in his piece. It's not a total endorsement of every single idea, but that's not entirely wrong. And if you look at the trajectory of the Tea Party in particular, there was a lot of excitement among small government types. And what did the Tea Party end up delivering? In the end, it ended up kind of transforming into the Trump MAGA movement, which wasn't really about small government.
I don't disagree with that, but one of the things in the 90s is that we actually got pretty good governance out of once the Republican Revolution took hold after the 94 election. There were 5 years of major significant bipartisan laws that were generally considered pretty effective, and government deficits went down mostly because the economy increased, but there was also some tax cuts. So cultural grievance is frustrating and annoying to me. I suspect it is to many libertarians, but it's also, it's not the only thing that was going on in the Gingrich years.
Katherine, before we semi-leave the topic, I wanted to give you an opportunity to sing the praises of having multiple C-SPAN camera angles during the proceedings last week.
Absolutely delicious. I mean, we're really seeing what we're missing out on. I understand that there's it's a real repeat play hostage situation in the chambers there, where C-SPAN wants to be in and wants access, and the members of Congress don't want C-SPAN to film the fact that no one's in the chamber ever, among other things. But everywhere else in our lives, we now have, the sports ballers with the microphones on, chitter-chattering, and we get to hear it. And, up close and personal confessionals interspersed with whatever story is being told. We need this in Congress. It was great to see just the general kind of floor interplay. And I think it ultimately gives people a better understanding of what's going on. I know the American people are not just out here watching C-SPAN. Washington, D.C. is a weird place, but, there are these kind of still pictures that emerged from that experience that were very telling. The one that looks like a Caravaggio of all the arms outstretched, and like the scene where people are grabbing each other and covering each other's mouths, the phone that just shows DT calling, there was just it was
While Rosendale was going talk to the hand, right?
I mean,
when like Marjorie Taylor Greene is showing the Trump call, and he's like, "Nope,
absolutely not." And like they truly do look like these kind of these paintings of like the Roman Senate, and that's what we should see. So I think the real heroes were the C-SPAN camera operators, and they should be allowed to practice their art more fully in the chamber.
I always think it's weird when I go to another city and I go to the gym and no one is watching C-SPAN.
You need to be stopped.
Weird.
Yes, Nick?
I will point out that over 10 years ago, I believe, we had a Reason video which was talking about the need for cameras in the Supreme Court. And we started with the fact that there has been live footage from Katie Couric's rectum. The least we should do is be getting 360 coverage of Congress, the White House, and the Supreme Court. Look it up.
No, don't. Look up the video.
It's a good video.
Look up
it's a good
Katie
video.
Couric's rectum. This is just a basic Monday morning hygiene situation. All right, we're going to go a little bit early to our listener email of the week because it's kind of related. I'll do that in a moment. But first, friends, you might think you've done everything in your power to insure your family in the case of a medical emergency. But what many of us don't realize is that health insurance won't always cover the full cost of, for example, an emergency medical flight. If you require air transport, even comprehensive coverage can leave you with high deductibles and copays. That's where AirMedCare Network comes in. When you sign up to become a member of the AirMedCare Network, should any such emergency arise, you will not see a bill for air medical transport when flown by a provider. AirMedCare transports more than 100,000 patients each and every year. It's about a dozen just in the duration of this podcast. This peace of mind for you and your whole family can be yours beginning at the low, low price of just $85 a year. Listeners to the Roundtable can get gift cards with their new membership for up to $50 through either Visa or Amazon. Simply visit airmedcarenetwork.com/reason and use the offer code REASON and start protecting your family. Do it today. You'll be glad you did. All right, reminder, email your short queries to roundtable@reason.com. This one comes from Mark Brokaw, who writes, in the last episode, you all discussed ongoing process for electing a new Speaker of the House. You discussed the demand request of the 19 or so Republicans who don't back McCarthy that he return to more normal House proceedings like the introduction of amendments, debate on the floor, etc. One of their demands, the introduction of the fair tax bill, was unaddressed on the last podcast. What do the panel members think of the fair tax, both within the Speaker vote context, but also more broadly? I'd be interested in a libertarian take on the fair tax. Assuming that abolishing taxation is unlikely, does the fair tax represent a much better alternative to our current system? Katherine.
I admire fair tax people. There are people out there who are just like still out here trying to make fair tax a thing. And I applaud the commitment to what feels like a very, very, very difficult reach. As a general matter, I think it's a good proposal, right? The appeal of a fair tax is that it's basically a consumption tax that therefore dramatically reduces the opportunity to use the tax code to manipulate behavior, which is one of my biggest pet peeves, and also really reduces the incredible inefficiencies in the tax code. You may recall McCarthy got in trouble for saying that the IRS was going to hire tens of thousands of agents to march to our doors and, steal our money. And that was the first order of business, was to roll back that additional IRS funding.
Well, to vote for it without, they're not actually going to do it because
was to think about
the
that
Senate
stuff.
And Joe Biden are not going to let that happen.
Right. And in fact, this is the fate of the fair tax always. It's it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Stop trying to make fetch happen. But it's a great idea. In a world in which this could be a thing, I would like it to be a thing. I guess in some fair tax proposals, there is a prebate or basically what amounts to kind of a little bit of a backdoor UBI in ways that make me a smidge nervous because, again, my desire is to have as few levers as possible to pull for these idiots who are in charge. And that strikes me as one to pull that could be a problem. But in general, the vibes are immaculate. The likelihood of a fair tax actually occurring still strikes me as near zero. But you do you, babies.
Peter, you're a technocrat at heart. Do you love this or do you hate this?
I mean, there's things to like about it. It's politically impossible, but like, let's table that for just a second.
Like, we want lots of stuff that's politically
impossible is worth talking about still. The consumption taxes are more efficient, right? The VAT taxes, the value-added taxes that they have in Europe are extremely efficient taxes. And by efficient, I don't just mean, I mean they don't produce deadweight loss, which is a sort of economics term for like sort of for an economic, a larger burden on the economy. There are things to like about that. One of the reasons that it is politically impossible, though, is that if you don't have that prebate, if you don't, or some sort of rebate on your fair tax, then what it amounts to is a tax hike on lower income Americans, because a very large percentage of the country right now effectively does not pay income tax at all. And so if you say we're not going to have an income tax, but we are going to have basically a sales tax as our primary mode of taxation, then that ends up taxing people who make less money, who sort of more of their income goes to kind of daily spending that would fall under the fair tax. And so that is both something for libertarians to think about in terms of, well, is that actually fair? There are certain people, certainly some people would say it's not. But even if you think that's fair, because it's just we're taxing the value of the thing that you purchase, right? Regardless of whether of how much you make. Even if you think that's fair, it's going to be a huge political lift to sort of get that into the public consciousness, where when you hear Democrats just hammer home, or people opposed to the fair tax, just hammer home the idea that this means a tax hike on low-income earners.
Nick, I paint you as a skeptic of the fair tax. Is that wrong?
Yeah, I think it is. I agree that it's politically somewhere between unlikely and impossible, but, taxes should be visible, fair, easy to enforce, and non-distorting. And the fair tax comes close, as closer on all of those as the current income tax. So that's all good. The one thing from a libertarian perspective, and I think both Peter and Katherine kind of were getting to this, it's not going to minimize the state in a particular way. You might get rid of whatever the IRS is now, but then you are going to have, according to the big plan, which would basically tax every exchange, every transaction at about 23% of the value of whatever you're buying or selling. You're going to have a prebate. You're going to need an agency that kind of figures that out and then sends that out. You're going to have something at the end of the year where you tally up to make sure that the prebates went to the right people and not the wrong people, or claw back whatever was too much or kick in more. So it gets complicated pretty quickly. But I wish we had more discussion of the fair tax, even if it didn't lead to a consumption tax. And more that it would get us thinking more about taxation and the way that the government is distorting economic activity all the time. Part of the problem with it, too, is it's often talked about as a kind of Republican-ish kind of thing. Gary Johnson, the former Republican governor of New Mexico, who ran as the LP's candidate twice and did spectacularly well by LP standards, was a big proponent of the fair tax. But the fact of the matter is Republican presidents, whenever there's a recession, the first thing they do is go out shopping publicly and say, hey, go buy some socks, go buy shit, which, the consumption tax would diminish that.
There's nothing like a soft pair of socks, though, to make you feel comfortable and happy on a Monday morning. Not when the
economy's fading,
Socks in this economy?
My minimal contribution to the discussion would be, Katherine mentioned UBI, Universal Basic Income, which in the best versions of it have been discussed as a replacement of existing social safety nets, but in practical application, that never happens. This is my practical objection, or the first practical objection to a fair tax, is that I'm all ears if you're getting rid of the income tax and the IRS. Sounds good, even though Nick is absolutely right. You have to still create some new other intrusive bureaucracy. But the way that things work like that in the real world is that it just becomes a new thing to tack on. It's not as if the VAT having countries of continental Europe are low tax, low intrusion entities. They're not. They find lots of ways to tax the hell out of you in lots of different places. So I have some worries about that. All right.
Can I actually just say one more little thing, which is that I think there's a new, the fair tax proposal has been around forever. Like, I think it's older than I am. And a new twist on it is the impact that it would have on crypto, because I do think there would be kind of both a desire to like people are going to want to do transactions off the books if that's where taxation lives, right? So first of all, like, what does that do to cash? Probably kill it forever. And second, either it's the thing that makes, people really adopt crypto in order to evade taxation, or it's the thing that drives regulators to finally definitively crush alternate modes of exchange, because that is the source of government revenue. So I think there are some secondary consequences that are worth thinking about as well, depending on how much you care about whether crypto survives.
Excellent points. All right, let's move to a subject that many Republicans were also speechifying about last week, whether they were pro-McCarthy or anti-McCarthy. It's crisis at the border. President Joseph Robinette Biden II this weekend made his first presidential visit to the international frontier with Mexico, announcing a new policy to triple the annual cap on refugee resettlement from Latin America and the Caribbean to 20,000 and to increase to 360,000 the annual non-refugee intake combined from the basket case countries of Venezuela, Nicaragua, Haiti, and Cuba, while at the same time increasing expulsions of illegal border crossers and making those people ineligible for reentry for 5 years. From the Associated Press write-up of this morning, quote, Biden's nearly 4-hour visit to El Paso was highly controlled. He encountered no migrants except when his motorcade drove alongside the border, and about a dozen were visible on the Ciudad Juarez side. His visit did not include time at Border Patrol Station, where migrants who cross illegally are arrested and held before their release. He delivered no public remarks. End quote. Katherine, we will talk about in a moment the substance of these policy changes, but can you kind of eyeball the political optics of this first, both the role that the subject played in Capitol Hill last week, just fentanyl, border, like in every other sentence, and also Biden's weird defensiveness kind of about it in terms of his public persona?
I think Biden has every reason to be defensive. He has absolutely betrayed the spirit of the immigration policy that he ran on. He has absolutely done what from the mouth of Donald Trump would have elicited howls of rage from those who want to see more open integration. And of course, I include myself in that. I think the visit to the border thing is weird. We really, really overvalue that. I don't understand why we want this symbolic state visit to the border. That doesn't strike me as a useful activity, honestly. But I would like to see Biden held accountable for the fact that he is just saying out loud, don't come here. Get in line somewhere else. I don't care how bad your home country is. Don't come here. That is not what I hoped for from a Biden administration on immigration. And while I'm happy to see some of those legal thresholds lifted slightly, it's not enough.
Peter, despite Katherine's skepticism, we have record numbers of people coming through the border, and the border communities impacted, and people throwing people on buses and sending them to New York, including Jared Polis, by the way.
Yeah.
Governor of Colorado is busing migrants to New York.
Maybe the legal psychedelics are taking effect.
Maybe it's okay for a president to go and look at a policy that the president is in fact in charge of and is suing states to stop trying to be so much in charge of.
Well, to some extent, the president is in charge here. Obviously, Biden is, has some authority to make decisions about border enforcement. At the same time, the root problem here is Congress. And it is that we do not have any sort of coherent legislation when it comes to immigration. And that's because there is no agreement in Congress about how immigration should be handled. Republicans basically don't want to see a lot of immigrants. Certainly, they do not want to see a lot of low-skilled immigrants, right? They to the extent that Republicans are okay with immigration.
They don't like the competition.
Yes. And it's crazy. They're complaining about the surge at the border and about all the destructive effects and one of their complaints for years has been, these people take away our jobs, and yet we have really quite low unemployment right now. This is not an environment in which it's obvious that immigrants are coming in and taking people's jobs and just taking away opportunities from native-born Americans. And there's not a lot of good evidence that happens anyway. And so this is, to me, Biden's move is not entirely theater. Obviously, there's some substance here, but it is heavily political theater, and it is a result of the fact that Congress cannot get its act together. That Democrats, when they have the power, do not pass immigration reforms, in part because they are scared to do so, and that Republicans have become increasingly anti-immigrant as a party over the past 15 years or so. And in some ways, so I think that most of the blame lays on Congress, but I will say there is also the American people, because the voting public does not want a whole lot of additional immigration here. There really is. That's why you see Polis, why you see even Democrats sort of putting up this, we're going to push back on immigration, is because there is a significant part of the American voting public that just thinks that we shouldn't have any more immigrants, or we should only have the right kind of immigrants, a small group of highly skilled workers, that sort of thing. And that is a real bind for Congress to be in, is that they don't want to, they don't want to go against what they feel is the public demand here for much less immigration. And so I think that there needs to be some, if you want more immigration in this country, you need to both convince members of Congress, but also you need to convince the country that immigrants are good for America. They are. And I think that campaign is not being waged to a large extent.
Nick, Peter's righteous Congress bashing notwithstanding, the president and the executive branch have a lot of leeway that was expanded during the Trump administration through Supreme Court decisions.
And through Obama by his actions or attempted actions.
Right. Although the legal expansion, I think, was Trump at the Supreme Court. But regardless, what are some practical solutions? Well, first, what do you think about what Biden proposed as his kind of a new approach just now? But what are some practical things the president could do if we wanted to go more in a Nick Gillespie direction on immigration?
Well, one, and I think this is worth kind of talking about and trumpeting, is recognizing that three of the big sender countries who are targeted here, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, are either still actively communist countries or were in recent memory, or are run by former communist leaders when they were communist. That's something worth talking about. People are fleeing shitty economies, authoritarianism, and places that create not just political repression but economic repression. The reason why they're coming to the U.S. more and more is because the U.S. economy, as kind of sketchy as it is right now, is actually doing pretty well, particularly relative to other places. As Peter noted, this is a time of record or near record unemployment. We need more workers. Everywhere you go, people are talking about labor shortages. Nobody's talking about, we have too many workers. We don't need as many workers. We actually need more and more workers. I think some of the things that Biden did, including raising certain kinds of asylee caps and things like that, that's good. But what he failed to do, and this goes to Katherine's point, you don't go to the border if you're just going to ride around in, a big car with blackened windows and nobody even knows you're there. I mean, Biden may have thought that he was going to Camp David or something. How would he know the difference? He should have been making a statement at the border that he's done this in the past with varying degrees of rhetorical excellence, talking about America as a nation of immigrants, talking about his own family history, and kind of reframing this of, we need immigrants. We need new people, new workers, new ways of thinking about things to enrich and enliven our country. Up through sometime in the 90s, we still called ourselves a nation of immigrants. There was a broad, cultural, political, commercial emphasis on the benefits of immigration from, after World War II. At least through sometime in the 90s, when it was really Democrats who were leading the charge against illegal immigrations overrunning California and that sort of bullshit. What we need is a president to start with who actually makes a real case for the benefits of immigration, explains how legalizing more immigration will reduce illegal immigrations and all the worries and fears and problems that causes, and then tuck it into a national, kind of epic about, who we are and where we come from and where we're headed. It starts rhetorically because the immigrants are going to come whether it's legal or not. But once we get more comfortable with that, we can, I think, start to actually affect the cultural and especially the political changes that are needed.
Speaking of national epics, George Santos.
Solid.
He's our Don Quixote.
Absolutely the newest, craziest member of Congress.
With potentially immigrant roots, by the way, that keep changing and getting knocked out.
His immigration story is
he's
just
Jewish-ish. He's Brazilian-ish. Who knows? He's straight. He's gay.
I want to do a lightning round in honor of him and how just wonderfully sad and lonely he was last week sitting. There's Jim Newell from Slate had a phrase, a radius of emptiness around him. He has lied. If you haven't followed the story, he's lied about just about everything in his resume. His grandparents fleeing the Nazis, his mom dying on 9/11, his employees getting gunned down at the Pulse nightclub, his jobs, his academic career, his real estate holdings, lies. All of it just lies. So for a lightning round, because we are getting on in years here on this podcast, I thought we'd go around the table and each of us bring up other great political resume patters throughout American history and what ended up happening to them. Peter, why don't you start?
I just want to say that I think the George Santos story is a great American story, right? It's about
self-invention.
Yeah. It's about you can be whoever you want to be in America. You can be Jewish, Jew-ish, if you want, or not. So my pick for resume patter / biography fabricator is our current president, Joe Biden, who claimed, among other things, there's a great list put together by Tom Elliott a couple of weeks ago. He has claimed that he was arrested while trying to meet Nelson Mandela. He claimed that his son, Beau, was killed in Iraq, but Beau Biden died from brain cancer. He claimed that he spent part of a summer working as a tractor-trailer driver. He claimed that he graduated at the top of his class in college. In fact, he graduated near the bottom of his class. He claimed his first job offer was from an Idaho timber company, which apparently is not true. And this one is for Matt Welch. He also claimed that he hit a 368-foot home run in a congressional baseball game. He did not.
You know who did hit home runs in congressional baseball games? Nick, you know the answer to this question.
I'm assuming it's Dr. Ron Paul.
Dr. Ron Paul in a Houston Astros rainbow jersey, ladies and gentlemen. Nick, I know this is Biden's also your choice. Do you have other embellishments you'd like to add to his beautiful resume?
Biden, the greatest thing about him was having to quit the 1988 presidential campaign for, among other things, plagiarizing an English politician's life story, including having coal miner parents or grandparents. But since Peter did that, I just want to put in a word for Elizabeth Warren, who lied at various points, clearly either openly lied or lied by omission when she was mistaken for the Cherokee descended lady that she claimed to be at various points. But my favorite part of all of that whole story is that she added a recipe to a cookbook of Native American recipes called Pow Wow Chow. But
Yes.
that is itself awful. But what's even better is the recipes she used were plagiarized from a French cookbook. Yeah, according to Howie
Were they
Carr.
also just like for Waldorf salad or something?
Yeah, they were French. She included herb tomatoes and crab with tomato mayonnaise dressing, among other dishes. Which obviously, the Cherokee, that's what they ate on the Trail of Tears or something like that. So,
sounds like a pretty good Bloody Mary to me.
So Elizabeth Warren, needs to be remembered. And I'm not sure what happened to her. I know she was an academic, but I'm not sure what she's up to these days.
Katherine, do you have someone who maybe actually suffered consequences from their stupid lying?
I mean, I don't know if he suffered consequences from his stupid lying. Yeah, John Kerry. Let's talk about John Kerry. He's like the most, I think all of us just want to kind of pretend that never happened. And by that, I mean like all of John Kerry's life and career. To be swift-boated is, I suppose, to have lies told about you, right? And so there is this idea that in the end, all of these people saying that Kerry exaggerated his service record, they were the ones proved wrong. I think that's like technically true. Like I think he did in fact receive these medals, all that kind of thing. But if you follow the swift boat river to its source or whatever, what you find is the best mini controversy. I mean, there's so many Kerry controversies, but I just want to focus on the question of whether he did or did not throw away his combat medals. Does anybody remember that?
Yeah.
So
I think I know the answer, too.
He gave this television interview in 1971 where he says he gave back, I can't remember, 6, 7, 8, 9 medals. And then when he was running for president, he was like, no, I mean, I wouldn't say the medals exactly. And then there was this whole back and forth about whether he threw away the ribbons, but not the medals, and symbolically what that meant. And it was part of this moment where he was getting this reputation as a flip-flopper. And so it was the same moment as the I voted for it before I voted against it. And it was just like he had this kind of self-mythology, and he said something into a microphone in 1971 and never thought for one moment that he would have to like reconcile that, decades later. And he did. And he never satisfactorily explained that. Like, we do not know what the status of John Kerry's medals is to this day, as far as I know. The thing that always interests me about these stories, and I think Santos and Biden are both part of this phenomenon as well as Kerry, which is that I think these guys believe their own lies. And I think everybody lies about themselves, maybe, and politicians just get caught. I don't know. I find it to actually be like an interesting, deep question about there was also the Hillary Clinton helicopter thing. Remember when she was like, I was under sniper fire coming off a helicopter, and then there was like video of like a child holding flowers standing on the tarmac greeting her? Like, Hillary Clinton thought that story was true when she told it. Because we're not reliable narrators and memory is flawed, I don't know what to do with that in terms of how we hold our elected officials accountable. But I think politicians have to self-mythologize, and then they do, and then it's a problem.
Well, I think there's also this phenomenon where if you're a politician telling your personal story, you don't just tell it once. You don't just tell it twice. You tell it over and over again. And part of what you do if you are a good politician is you shape and sharpen your stories as you tell them over and over again. A little bit like comedians workshopping their jokes, right? Like it's the same basic idea, but I'm going to get the callback just right this time. Except they're not comedians telling funny stories. They're politicians telling stories about who they are that matter because they are symbolic to the country and what they represent and all of that. And so if you are a successful politician, you are almost certainly the sort of person who is good at iterating your stories to make them more effective over time. And probably your memories just sort of reshape themselves in a way that is convenient to telling those stories.
I followed a link from Scott Shackford's piece on George Santos on our website, reason.com. And it was just to a PolitiFacts category of Joe Biden. All right, let's click on that. It is amazing because every month he's out there saying crazy crap that didn't happen. Like, that's when I pinned my uncle with a Purple Heart as vice president or something. Nope, didn't happen. Not remotely. No record for it. Doesn't make any sense with the timeline. And he's said it multiple times. I encourage people to go check it out and to be freaked out that the president of the United States is saying untrue things about his life and his actions as president and as a politician out there. My example is a person I don't even remember existing in the past, but I looked this up and it was fun, named Wes Cooley, a Republican from Oregon, a freshman congressman, 1994. So he's part of the Gingrich wave. And he had said that, he'd seen combat as a member of the Army Special Forces in Korea. The only problems being that he had never deployed anywhere for combat, and he would never serve in the special forces.
Just a little detail, really.
Some details. He also said that he was Phi Beta Kappa. It wasn't. He also lied apparently about how long he'd been married to his wife in order for her to collect survivor benefits from a previous husband. He eventually was convicted of lying in an official document about his military record, which is apparently a crime. I thought it was a free country, but it's a crime. And instead of being censured in any formal way, he just didn't run for re-election and was bounced out after a ignominious, is that the word? Single term in the mid-90s from Republicans. Shout out Wes Cooley. He's also, like Tom Coburn, dead. So we have a lot of liars among us, and it is creepy, and they should be pointed at and laughed at constantly. Okay,
having said that, there seems to be a very loose correlation between being a liar and being successful. Ronald Reagan also misremembered many details from either movie roles he had or kind of Signal Corps films that he filmed during World War II with actual World War II experiences, among other things. So fabulism and being a good politician, they're in separate categories.
Is the bridge there just like method acting? Like these guys are just so method that they lose touch with reality? I don't know.
I also think the Santos, the Santos story, as much as it is a joke or a story about politicians, it's also a cautionary tale about bad journalism. The fact, even his opposition research file didn't check any of his facts. They just kind of listed it. It's, this all should have come out. I mean, if the press is actually a countervailing force to politics, boy, we really took the easy road out on this one.
There was a local paper that wrote about some of the stuff in September, but no one picked it up or cared. I think it's also a cautionary tale about two-party politics, right? Like, people didn't vote for Joe Santos because of his resume. They voted for him because they live in the suburbs of New York and were pissed off about Democrats this cycle. And he was the guy with a Republican on his sweater. All right, let's go to our end of podcast, what we all have been consuming. Peter, what did you consume?
I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark in a movie
Still
theater.
Holding up?
I've heard of that one.
Yeah. So it was a revival screening at the local Alamo Draft House. And you know what? It's a pretty good movie, guys.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good movie. I have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark dozens, maybe hundreds of times before, but never in a theater. And it just plays different on the big screen. It's more engrossing and more obviously crowd-pleasing in the same way that seeing a band live can show you how their songs are designed to appeal to a mass audience in the moment. Seeing a movie in the theater with a crowd just lets you understand, wow, this movie just is constantly giving the audience a hug and saying love me, right? But in a way that is totally appealing. You see, I think on the big screen, more than ever how much this movie relies on Harrison Ford's eyes very specifically. There are all these close-ups where you see him moving his eyes perfectly precisely, and then you'll see what he's seeing, and Spielberg is putting you in Harrison Ford's eyes and letting you see how he is sort of analyzing what's going on in the scene and what's surrounding him. Often it's just the geography of the set, right? And so Spielberg is notably just the master of action cinema. The total clarity of his compositions, of the geography of the objects in the screens, the way he just sort of shows you, here's a bunch of stuff, right? Sort of set out for us to play with in an action scene. And then every one of these things just sort of goes off in a mousetrap manner, right? Like it's just a succession of Chekhov's guns, all of which have been laid out at the beginning of the scene, and then all of which just sort of pop, 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 pop throughout the rest of the movie, at the end. It's just so great how many perfect physical setups and payoffs there are in that movie. You also see how much of it seems to draw from, of all things, Looney Tunes. There are so many good little cartoon gags in this movie. And similarly, you see, I think you're reminded of how much early Spielberg was really, he had a kind of gleeful interest in grotesquerie. And there's so much sort of like cartoon gore and violence in this movie that it's not like, it's much more gory than you'd see in any PG or really even PG-13 movie today. At the same time, it's very much in that sort of cartoon, almost Mad Magazine sort of mold of like, oh, sure, this is horrific, but it's also kind of wild and kind of funny. And you can see that sort of glint in Spielberg's eye as he's like, yeah, that's how that guy's face should melt off. It's just wonderful, and it's also kind of a great subversion of the action adventure hero in that you see how much Indiana Jones is kind of a jerk who doesn't play the part, right? He cheats, like he just read that famous scene where there's the guy with the sword who sets up a big confrontation, and Indy just really tiredly pulls out his gun and shoots him. But also like when the big hulking German guy fights him in front of the plane, the first thing Indy does is kick him in the balls. Because Indiana Jones is not like a nice guy who plays by the rules. He's the guy who leaves.
He was a Nazi.
Sure,
he was a big old Nazi. You kick him in the balls,
and you
Peter.
love him for it. He leaves Marion in the tent constantly. He's like, she's like, rescue me, and he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. That would foil my plan. Because he's a jerk. And then at the very end of the movie, does he himself take out all of the bad guys, all the Nazis? No, he just says, close your eyes, don't look. Let's let God do the work. And so that's the other thing that I saw.
Spoiler alert.
That's the other thing that I noticed in a way after having seen the Fabelmans, how much the Nazi antagonists, it's kind of personal for Spielberg in a way that I don't think I had realized when I was 8 or 9 and first seeing this movie. Is like, no, the end of the movie is like these guys messed with the Jews, and the God of the Hebrews is like, I'm gonna melt your face off. Not the action adventure hero who is set up as our protagonist. It's just God. It's the God of the Jews. He comes in and he's like, nope, Nazis, you get what's coming to you, and that's what happens, and it's wonderful. It's just such a great experience. If you have an opportunity to see it on a big screen, you should.
And yet this is Spielberg, maybe his 4th best World War II movie after Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List, and of course 1941, Matt's favorite Spielberg movie.
All pictures about Long Beach are number one on any list. To Peter's point about the big screen, I saw that on opening day in Irvine, California, as one does, when it came out on a big screen. So you didn't
have to deal with homeless people, Matt Welch, or lower middle class people? Yeah.
Or even pickup trucks parked out front of the house. We have standards around here.
Cookie cutter, ticky-tacky world of suburban Southern California.
Go see it on a big screen. Even him, Peter, talking about it, I have a perfect flashback in my brain of the long extended opening scene in the South American jungle, and it just envelops you. It's amazing. You cannot get that experience watching it even on your home big screen TV. It's a great movie. All right, Katherine, save us from all this juvenile Spielbergania.
I enjoyed it, actually. I read Kat Rosenfield's new book. She is, of course, a sometime Reason contributor and video star. Her book comes out tomorrow. and she was kind enough to send me an advance copy. It's called You Must Remember This. It's a novel, and I reviewed her previous novel, No One Will Miss Her. This book is similar in many ways in that it's got a little bit of like a mix of genres going on. The advertising copy suggests that it's a Knives Out style whodunit. So I'm just, I guess, all in on every glass onion everywhere forever and ever. Amen. But that's a little bit of what's going on here. It's really good. Again, not necessarily the genre I usually read, but I found it to be particularly good in that the main character, the protagonist, is a 26-year-old woman whose voice and combination of worldliness and abysmal ignorance is exactly right for what it is like to be a 26-year-old. Like, no offense to the 26-year-olds on Reason staff, but she's really smart. She's really observant. She understands a lot about the world. And also, the older people in the story are like, I'm sorry, you didn't understand these 5 crucial things about the world? And she's like, no, absolutely not. I did not. In a way that just felt very real. So I liked that a lot. It had some Agatha Christie energy. It had some Knives Out energy. The best bit, and this is a slight spoiler, but very slight, for those of us who are on the side of the internet that briefly lost its mind about the Negroni with champagne or Prosecco on top, the Negroni Spagliato, that like the whole world discovered those and drank them in October. This book ends with that drink, but must have been written before that moment. So Kat Rosenfield manifested the Negroni Spagliato moment in our reality, and we should thank her for that.
Speechless. Nick, what did you consume?
I watched a new documentary film called The Invisible Extinction, which is all about the human microbiome and how inside our gut bacteria, or our gut bacteria is being deplenished. Deplenished? Does that even make sense?
Nope.
Diminished.
Perfect.
Deplenished. I like that. And
Yeah,
we need to replenish it in various ways.
That's like one of those words Edward Norton uses in Glass Onion.
That's
yeah,
really
pretty much.
true. The disruptors have deplenished our gut bacteria. Yeah.
The Invisible Extinction, though, is a documentary that was, I should put out there, was co-produced, executive produced by Jerry Orstrom, Reason's chairman of our board of trustees, but which is why I saw it when it opened in New York. It also has some showings in LA, but it's available video on demand. If you care about kind of progress of science, watch this documentary. The actual subject matter is fascinating about how the microbiome, our gut bacteria, forms who we are, limits who we are, enables who we are. It's all genuinely fascinating on that. But then the larger frame is, how does science get done and how do we progress in science? So I highly recommend The Invisible Extinction. Like I said, it's limited showings in New York and LA, but you can watch it on Amazon, Apple TV, Vimeo On Demand, Google Play, pretty much any streaming service. You can download it or for rent or buy. But highly, highly recommend Invisible Extinction. Don't eat before you see it.
So I've been on an ongoing series with my soon-to-be 8-year-old, looking at documentaries and other films associated with ancient civilizations. So we've kind of marched through recently from the Egyptians to the Jews to the Greeks, and we now went looking for Romans, right? That's what you do after the Greeks. And so it's kind of difficult to just do a, hey, machine, give me the good documentary that's all right for kids about ancient Rome, and stumbled upon one that has been very effective so far. I've seen 2 of the 4 episodes. It's Mary Beard's Ultimate Rome, Empire Without Limit. Mary Beard is this very funny kind of affable British classicist. She's associated with the British Museum, and she kind of tromps in her high tops, which the camera loves a little bit too much through all these different Roman ruins in different cities, including Lyon, France. Shout out to Lyon. But spectacularly in places in Algeria that I never heard of. And just kind of describes the Roman Empire. She's British. It was done in 2016. It's BBC. There's a little bit of extra Britishness about it, and the founding of London, which is a Roman settlement, which I kind of didn't know. And she's dealing with themes that certainly resonated in English politics and at the time. So a lot of immigration, assimilation questions and citizenship questions and such. But it's just really good. If you watch it with your 7-year-old or someone of similar age, it's not made for kids. There might be some uncomfortable questions like, Daddy, what's rape? So that's not always so great. But everything else about it was and is just really good. Hour-long episodes, perfect length for a kid's attention span. And if anyone out there listening has other recommendations that would be good for a brainy little kid who's interested in this stuff about any other ancient civilization, please feel free to drop me an email or a comment or whatever. Not a comment. I'm not going to read it. An email. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. If you like our stuff at Reason Foundation, consider giving us a tax-deductible donation, reason.com/donate. All of our podcasts live at reason.com/podcast. Nick, what can you tell us about anything that's coming up in the interview with Nick Gillespie World/Speakeasies in New York City?
Yeah, on Wednesday, we will be releasing last week's Speakeasy, which was about harm reduction as drug policy with Andrew Tatarsky and Maya Solovitz. That's on tap in about a month. Check out at reason.com/events, but we'll be having another Speakeasy on Monday, February 6th with the aforementioned Kat Rosenfield. Talking about the lure of mystery thrillers and also the dread threat of cancel culture and speech police.
She wrote a recent, very excellent piece that was put up on Reason late in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. All about a topic that I've conveniently forgotten, but it has to do with Kanye West. Anyways, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week, I think on Tuesday, right? Katherine, you're the boss. Is Martin Luther?
Yep.
Tuesday. So Tuesday it is. Thank you. Goodbye.